offer you this lesson from Unity of the Keys Spiritual Center.
So good to be back here again. I always feel like it's one of the important spiritual homes I have on our island. Suzanne said, why don't I say a little bit more about myself? You said it was a little skimpy in the introduction. Well, because there are people in the room who don't know me, so I'm going to say a few things. I've been a Unitarian Universalist minister for 49 years. Yeah. But in the last 3 years, since I officially retired, there is no such thing as a retired minister, however, but I retired, I've been preaching lots of places, speaking lots of places, leading worship lots of places. So here at Unity, Presbyterian Church, AME and AME Zion, missionary and regular Baptist. How many types of Baptists are there? There's hundreds of thousands. Lots of places. And here's one thing I've discovered. We're more alike than we are different. That the scriptures that underlie some, that don't underlie others, are irrelevant. But the connections that we have are. When I speak about the human condition, and then I reference the scriptures that are in that tradition, it's the same as mentioning it anywhere else and using different ones. We're all talking about that relationship between humanity and the source of existence, the divine, the one, the all that is. It's all one big sameness. And the things that seem to divide us are things like, here's one of those church words, polity. Who runs the show? You know, I go some places where the minister has absolute authority. I don't think that's here. That's certainly not in Unitarian Universalism. And other places, the congregational body has the power. In other places, it's the board of elders. In other places, the board of deacons. In other places, it's a non-existent, or at least not local, existent bishop who has all the control. So all that goes on, but underneath it all, we're all trying to do the same work. We're all trying to wrestle with what it means to be alive, and to be alive meaningfully. But before I was a minister, I had another life, believe it or not. I have a degree in physics, and I worked in physics research for Eastman Kodak for a number of summers, and they still hold a few patents of mine on some stuff. We were working on a thing called non-haloid photography. No silver involved. It's what's better known as electrostatic, or what you now have as laser printers. And Kodak had that great foresight and wisdom to say film is forever, and wouldn't fund our endeavors. But anyway, that's another story. I also was a railroad engineer for several summers. I mean, actually driving the trains. Big 100-ton beastie. All over upstate New York, southern Ontario, lots of places. But the one thing you may not, I suspect a number of people in here have heard that before about me, what I've done. But there's one other thing you may not be aware of. Beginning in 1995, after the death of our daughter, she was 20, killed by a drunk driver, we began a series of spiritual communications with the other side. We conduct afterlife communications, my wife and I. And this has been one of the most deeply meaningful and spiritual aspects of my life. I've learned so much in those contacts and conversations, all of which we have recorded dutifully, transcribed and all that sort of stuff, about life. And so when you hear me preach, I'm preaching much more out of that spirituality than I am out of any denominational spirituality. That's the thing that has touched my heart and my soul, that puts me in touch with spirit and all those wonderful spirits who are dancing around here right now, I should tell you. So in that spirit, let's move on. I'm going to do something you normally don't do here in a worship service. If you have a cell phone, I want you to take it out. I want you to turn it on, but not the sound. All right, we're going to do a little contest here. I've got 62% in my battery. Who's got a lower number? Aaron? 59. 59. I've got 59. Have I got a lower number? Anyway, yes? 56. Anything lower than 56? How are we doing on that? Yeah, it's 56. Hey, we're above average as a group. Yes? 45. Oh, I'm sorry. I always think about the relativity of this. You know, if you're driving along in a car and you had 45% of your gas, you'd feel fine. But on a phone, you begin to go, maybe I ought to recharge it. And then once in a while, you get to that magic thing where it turns red. And you get messages that pop up on the screen. I want to tell you about an experience I had about 2 weeks ago. My phone had gotten down to the red. I had been out and about. And so I went to recharge it. I plugged it in. It said it was recharging. I saw that number climbing. All was well. So after about an hour, I unplugged it again, and it was at 13%. So I plugged it back in, and suddenly it was at 100%. Then I unplugged it again, and it was at 12%. I was plugging into my source of recharge. I was plugging that phone in to get it back up to full 100%. I would have settled for 89% or something like that, but it was doing its job. But it only had it for as long as I had that phone connected to the charger. And this problem got worse and worse and worse because I would do that and it would go up supposedly, but then unplugging, now it's down to 11. I'm beginning to think this is a downward spiral I don't want to get into. 10. Plan, please. Instant prayers for technology. So I finally went on to the great authority, the great scripture of all existence, the internet, and asked the question about this, and the first thing that popped up was, you probably have an app conflict. And it sounded very military, an app conflict. In my phone, there is a war going on. The forces of good versus evil. The forces of positivity versus negativity. Oh, what's going on here? It said, of course, to do the one thing, eliminate the source of the conflict. If I knew what the source of the conflict was, I would have eliminated it already. I didn't know. So then, of course, it gave that wise wisdom you often hear. Begin deleting your most recently installed apps and see if it gets better. So I'm looking, I'm thinking, well, why don't I look at the ones I think are suspect first? But no, I had to start what was the most recent one, then the one before that. And about 3 in, when I pulled it out, all of a sudden I could plug it in. It would charge up, I'd unplug it, and it would be charged. Now, why am I telling you this story? Am I trying to bring you into some kind of technological revelation? Am I trying to tell you that there's warfare on your phone and that your apps are in conflict with each other? No, I want to use it as an analogy. An analogy to your prayer life, to your spirit life. And I want to think about people who have lived an intense life of meditation, contemplation, prayer, meditation, presence. And one of the people who always comes to my mind is Henry David Thoreau. You know, man who walks to the beat of a different drummer. Wish we had Skipper here, we could have him be a different drummer today. Who, for a period of several years, went out to Walden Pond and lived the life he wished to live it deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and as he said, not when he came to die, discovered that he had not lived. You know, most of us spend maybe, if we're very hurried, a moment or two in prayer or meditation per day. Others, it may be a set-aside portion of the day where we stop everything we're doing and center down. But not like he was, at least most weekdays. We have to acknowledge on weekends, Sunday, he would walk into town and get pies from his mother. and then come back out to the pond. But the rest of the time, he was absorbed almost 24 hours a day, 6 days a week, in being present, in being mindful, in being prayerful, in letting go of all that outside world to ask, what is there I would see if I weren't so busy with everything I think is so important, but really isn't? So I often think about him, about that life. But then I think back to our own lives, those lives I mentioned in which maybe we get a 2-minute prayer in here or there, or maybe we give ourselves what we consider a luxury of 15 minutes of meditation, or maybe we set aside half an hour. And I want to talk about that experience, whether it be 10 minutes or 15 minutes or half an hour, or even all your life for 2 years, and those phones. I want you to think about the last time that you were in a situation of deep prayer or meditation, when you let yourself go and disconnect from all the physical demands of life and found yourself in the realm that belongs to spirit. What took you into that? Were you going there because you felt you had some deficiency, some lack? Did you feel that you were overworked? Did you feel you were anxious? Did you feel that you were unwell? Did you go there in a spirit of abundance and thankfulness, that life was so rich and wonderful you just had to go somewhere and express it because no one else would ever understand it, but God would certainly understand that thankfulness? Why did you go? Why did you go into that space in your life that is set to be a place of contemplation and meditation and consideration? And when you were there, how did it feel? If you're like I am, when I get into a meditative state, there are no words to describe it. William James, in his Varieties of Religious Experience, talks about the wonderful mystical moments of life, and when you're truly in them, you can't find words to describe what it was like when you were in that state. That they just escape any way of being expressed. If someone said, "So what did you feel?" When I say that to you right now, I don't expect words back. But I expect you to be aware in the core of your being how it felt, even if you can't put words to it. And so you're in that space, not really space, you're in that experience, you're in that moment, you're in that other than being here-ness. And you know how it feels. And then you come back. You come back into your own place in existence. And at least for me, I know one of my hopes is that whatever is there will abide with me. But you know, it's too often that I'm fine when I'm there. But when I'm not there, the same problems beseech me. The same aches and pains of soul and body. The same trials and tribulations of life and learning are still all there. That I've gone somewhere and done something, and it was wonderful, it was awesome, and I let my spirit and the Great Spirit together find an energy I didn't know. It would be like the battery recharging up to 100%. But then when I unplug that cord, when I step outside the meditation, when I stop the prayer, when I give myself back over to the world, it's like 11%. To me, whether you call it meditation, or you call it prayer, or connection, or silence, whatever name you want to put to it, there needs to be some transactional nature to it. That it's not just you dumping stuff on somebody else, or that something else is plugging you in, but somehow More than transactional, transformational. One of the things that I've learned through my spiritual encounters in these communications is that most people are very good at learning things. The problem is most people learn the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. They're in some kind of mode of understanding and learning, and they take it in and they go, "Oh, I am transformed." And yet the next moment, they're not transformed. That there is this requirement that we not only learn, but that we remember. That we take the things we have in those great moments of spiritual connectedness and we somehow incorporate them, make them part of our being, make them part of our bodies and our minds and our spirits to such an extent that it's not a learning that sits separate from us but becomes integral to who we are. And that takes me back to Henry David Thoreau and also to his good friend Ralph Waldo Emerson, who, by the way, liked to be called Waldo and not Ralph. And he said, Emerson did, paraphrasing now, "It's easy in solitude to live after your highest values. But the real challenge is how to take the values you learn in your solitude and have them with you in the midst of the busiest of times. It's easy to find the glorious vision in the midst of meditation," I'm now saying, or to find that blessed peace and calm in the midst of prayer. But the real trick is to learn how to translate that so that when you are in the midst of the world, when you are in the argument with someone you love, when you're on the streets and the cars ahead of you filled with tourists are going ridiculously slowly, when the cruise ship hasn't sailed out before the sunset, when the project you thought would take 1 hour has taken 8, when the dish you're cooking doesn't come out as the recipe says, to somehow have that sense you had when you were in that place of understanding and meaning and peace and apply it in those situations. In the end, Henry David Thoreau closed the door on his little self-made cabin. There's no evidence he locked the door because no one else was out there. And he walked back into Concord and began to carry on his life, doing other things. But he had not left the experience of Walden at Walden. He took it with him. Because he had learned in the end, as he says toward the end of his reflections, that if you've built castles in the air, that's where they need to be. Now build foundations under them. That what we do in solitude, in perfection, in divinity, in the greatest depths of understanding, only take on meaning when we can take them out and into the world so that people see them flowing through us in all we do, and not just when we are alone in our own quiet space. So I invite you to seek out that kind of prayer, that kind of meditation, that kind of connection to spirit, by which you don't just get a sudden jolt that makes it look like your spiritual batteries are back to full charge, but when you detach from it, you're right back where you were. But seek out those understandings by which you get something to take with you, that later in the day, later in the week, later in the month, later in the year, maybe later in your life, you remember back to what you felt and what you experienced and what you learned, and realize it wasn't just for then. It was for now and evermore. Remember, Henry David Thoreau went home again.